Welcome everyone who is able to join us today. This is May 3rd's session of our monthly online Q&A for Ecovillage at Ithaca. And each month we've been featuring different topics related to living in an eco-village or co-housing, and specific, conveying specific things about what it is like and what it means to live in our eco-village at Ithaca community. So this month we are featuring the topic of livelihoods and people who've created a business or a livelihood based here at Ecovillage. So our guests are Graham Ottoson, who created Gourdlandia, and she'll talk about that. And we also have Jim Entwood, who has a martial arts dojo. And I'll just say the three of us will be answering questions. So after Graham and Jim speak a little bit about their experiences here as residents and business owners, we will open it up to question and answer, and that can be any topic. It doesn't have to just be livelihoods, and the three of us have been here at different lengths of time, lived in different neighborhoods, have different kinds of experiences, so can together try to answer your questions. I'll just, by way of introduction for myself, my name is Caitlin Cameron. I'm the project director for Thrive, which is the education and outreach arm here at Ecovillage. And our mission is to help share the lessons learned and the story of Ecovillage to inspire other communities. And we also at Thrive seek to bring in knowledge and expertise and conversations to inform our own evolution as a community too. So we see it as a knowledge exchange. And I'm a recent resident of Ecovillage. I've been here just 7 months, and I have lived in Ithaca before. I was a student at Cornell many, many years ago, and always liked Ithaca, so I would keep coming back to visit, and actually took a tour of Ecovillage in 2015, just as our third neighborhood was finishing up. Ecovillage has 3 neighborhoods. We have 100 households, approximately 240 residents. And we were founded in 1991. So then each neighborhood was developed incrementally over time. So I recently moved into the Frog neighborhood, which was our first neighborhood built in the mid-90s. And Graham and Jim both live in the Song neighborhood, which is our second neighborhood built in the early 2000s. And then Tree is our third neighborhood, completed in 2015. And we're located here in Ithaca, New York, which is the Finger Lakes region. Also historically land tended by the Haudenosaunee or Gayakono people. And we are up on the West Hill of Ithaca, which is about 2 miles out of downtown. So that's a little bit of context, and I would like to turn it over to Jim, who wanted to start, and you said you had some slides to share too. So I will stop my share and turn it over to Jim. And I'll ask folks to mute yourself too as Graham and Jim are speaking, and then once we get to the Q&A, you can unmute again. Thanks.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and
Great.
we see your slides.
Excellent. So I'm Jim Entwood. I live here in Song in Ecovillage. and I teach martial arts at a dojo that I run here. So I grew up in Western New York, primarily in Nunde, which is at the bottom of Letchworth State Park. And I started taking martial arts in 1985 with my sensei, Judy Stiegler. She's the one with the red belt in the center here. And in the 80s through the 2000s, she had 3 schools in Western New York. They were spaced about 15 miles apart. And she ran 3 classes per night, 5 nights a week. So it was her full-time job. As a self-employed martial arts teacher, she made less than a public school teacher, which had been her previous job, but was able to support a family as a single mom teaching martial arts. One of the things that I think helped her succeed in that area was living in a rural area that had maybe a little lower housing costs than we have here in Ithaca. So I work full-time at Cornell University and teach martial arts part-time. So it's not something I do to pay all the bills, but we can come back to that. So after growing up in Western New York, my wife and I moved to Maine to get away from family, and then moved back here in 2011 to be close to family. We had a 3 and a 5-year-old at the time. We decided to join TREE as joint venture members during the design process and as it was built out. We liked the community dynamic of folks looking out for each other. We liked the rural feel for our kids, as well as having the small city close by, and the conservation aspect. We were moving from a house in Maine where we spent, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000 a year on heating bills to a house where we spent $300 a year on heating bills. So that was a pretty big draw. And we lived downtown for a couple of years during the build process. And then in 2013, we moved into TREE. And this is a picture of our house there. Right before the pandemic, our kids got bigger. They're both taller than me now. They take up a lot of space. So we moved to a slightly larger house in the Song neighborhood, which is where I am today. So I had been teaching kid martial arts classes at the Northern Lights Learning Center, which is a homeschooling co-op in Ithaca, which my kids were part of. And so when I moved to Ecovillage, I already had the sole proprietor business set up. I had the insurance set up, and I was able to tap into the spaces available here to be able to run classes from the building right next door to my house, which has lots of good vibes for me about being able to have a shared space, about being able to not have to drive all around to teach classes. For the spaces themselves, we have a calendaring system where I can reserve spaces on a weekly basis. There's very few conflicts, like the number of people looking to use spaces on a regular basis isn't huge here. And every once in a while, there's some special event, graduation party or something like that, where I just am flexible. We have 3 common houses, so it's possible when there's a big meal happening, that I can have classes in one of the other common houses. Since COVID, I started doing classes outside. I was navigating federal, state, county, and the individual policies of each of the 3 neighborhoods at Ecovillage with regards to COVID policies. And it meant that available spaces weren't able to be used for martial arts classes for a while. So I started going outside. I lost most of my students. We went from 5 adults and 10 kids to 2 adults and no kids. Over the past year, it's been building back up, which has been really exciting. I've had classes with 12 kids showing up at one time, which has been great. It's also pushed me out of my comfort zone. I view martial arts as something that's kind of private and internal with me and my students. So going outside, I don't know, it's like whatever art you do, if I'm not an extrovert, I wouldn't go out and do yoga in the middle of the field, but now that's kind of the mode I'm pushed into here. And I'll come a little back to that a little bit about some of the challenges. One highlight here is I was able to use one of the dining areas for a large demonstration last fall, where we demonstrated kata, self-defense, throwing, aikijutsu, which are pressure points. And then we had all the students do board breaking, and we were able to invite the neighborhood to come and see what we're doing. We didn't open it up to the full public. I dream about doing that someday, to have a big demo. But this was a good way for the neighbors to kind of have a sense of what we're doing. So I'm going to touch on a few challenges that I've run into running the business, and then some opportunities. One of the challenges is there's over 14 martial arts schools in Ithaca. So if I wanted this to be my full-time job and I was paying Ithaca rents for a space, I would have to do a whole lot of marketing, a whole lot of pressuring students to keep money flowing my way. And right now I don't have to do that. The schools my sensei set up are still running, and they make between $4,000 and $10,000 a year. So I'm not at that point yet. Again, I work at Cornell full time, so I'm able to pay the bills. I'm able to make a little bit of money, but I kind of have the long game in mind. And even my own kid left karate to go do circus culture downtown, which he's really excited about. There's just so much going on. With spaces at Ecovillage, so if I ruled the world, each of our common houses would serve a different niche, the 3 common houses, and instead each one sort of serves the same niches of having a big dining area and kitchen and living room. We do have some variations. We've got a nice ping pong and pool space, and some are set up for movie watching, but we don't have a big open space dedicated for movement arts or those kinds of things, indoor athletics. But I make it work with the spaces we have, and I'm very grateful that I have this kind of flexibility to shift between buildings to avoid conflicts. One of the conflicts we do run into is noise, and that goes in both directions. Martial arts can be loud at times, and I try to not run a whole 2-3 hour class with shouting the whole time through. And it also goes the other way when the lawnmower is going by, or we're doing a meditation practice and people are walking by talking. So just something we manage to work with. Okay. And I put smell up here because I love the smell of cooking garlic. It's just a little tough teaching a class with my stomach going like, I'm going to find out what's for dinner. I already talked about the pandemic, so we can go by that one. So opportunities wise, I love getting to meet the neighborhood kids who come and try out classes, even if they don't stay with it. I get to meet them. I kind of see their spark and where their interests are. Financially, I dream about keeping this as supplemental income. So as I near retirement, in theory, I would have more time to put into some of the advertising and marketing, as well as teaching, offering more classes, and that could give me a little bit more income so that to help cover living costs later on in life. And I've also taken inspiration from the Ithaca way of doing things. So instead of having one set fee, I now have a sliding scale fee. And instead of saying everybody has to pay by the first of the month, I let people pay per class or per month. And yeah, so I feel good about kind of taking down the barriers for those that want to do martial arts, and cost might be a factor for them. And that's, I think, it for me. Yes. Was there anything else? Oh, just with the vibe, I love that, martial arts for me is about being grounded. It's about being aware. It's about the camaraderie of being in class, like I said, with students, whether they're kids or adults. there's not a lot of consumables to this. You know, I'm not selling plastic stuff. It's about awareness and working with students. Part of that is kind of like taking in the awe of nature when we get to have classes outside and the birds are singing and doing their thing, or we can meditate by watching the pond and kind of the way the wind is moving across the pond. Just lots of good interconnections between, in my view, what martial arts is and being at Ecovillage and co-housing. Even the part about dealing with conflict that always arises, and always finding nonviolent ways of dealing with those conflicts as they come up. And that's it for me. And then I'll be happy to answer questions later.
That's great, Jim. I thought of a couple of questions, but I'll save those for when we get to the question and answer section. Graham, did you want to talk about your experience with livelihoods at Ecovillage?
Sure. I'm Graham Ottoson, and I live in Song with in the same neighborhood as Jim. And but I'm here at Gourdlandia now, and I thought I'd start just by showing people around a little bit. Let's see, I'm going to turn. So this is my shop. So Gourdlandia is kind of just like you would think from the name. It's a business about gourds. I grow gourds here and I turn them into lamps and stuff. And just so you can see, this is where I am. This is Rachel Carson Way. That's the third neighborhood tree there. And that's out to 79. So people come in my shop and they say, what is this place? And I never know quite if they mean Gourdlandia or Ecovillage. I do get a lot of questions from people wondering what kind of community is going on here. So like I said, this is the shop, and this is a little spare studio. If this had been happening 3 hours ago, there would be nothing in here at all. But Jessica Woodhouse is moving into the neighborhood, and she's going to be doing her paintings here at Gourdlandia. So she's going to be renting this spare studio. And lamps are my favorite thing to make out of gourds. And this is where I make them, working on these gourds here. I can show you one I finished this morning. This is the bathroom showroom, most popular room in the building. It's got a gourd toilet paper hanger. And here's a little nightlight I made this morning with a Luna moth on it. And yeah, all gourds all the time. And out here is where I grow the gourds. That owl is supposed to be keeping the robin from bashing its head on the window, but it's not working yet. It's all a lot of weeds now and some compost. And if you come in here in the late summer, early fall, it's all gourds hanging down in the trellis. And then we set them, we put them in here in the shed to dry all winter long. And when they dry, they look pretty ferocious. You might think that there was a problem with this gourd, but there's not. These gourds, they just need a bath. It's part of the process. I could go on for hours and hours. In fact, I'm doing a class through Atlas Obscura, and tonight is the second session, and I'll get it to go on for hours and hours about gourds, which is what I love to talk about. But I thought you're pretty interested, I guess, in livelihoods. So when I moved to Ecovillage about 20 years ago, I'm going to turn this around so you can see me again. I was not a gourd artist. I was a midwife. And that's a whole nother story, how I went from being a midwife to being a gourd artist. But so I'm going to skip over that because again, that's the story. I was doing gourd art in my basement in Song, and it's a dusty process. And so after I had been doing it for several years and just dipping my toe into the idea of selling things and finding out that indeed I could sell things. Anyway, one thing led to another, and we decided to build a studio here, if possible. But the time between getting the idea to build a studio and actually have it happen was a couple of years of process just to get the space, just to get permission, I should say. Obviously lots of meetings, lots of talking to people. I think I already had some trust from people that I could make things happen. We live in a straw bale house in the second neighborhood, which was in itself a big undertaking to just facilitate that coming into being. And also, I think it's our house is unique, and if you ask me, it's really beautiful. And I think I had some trust from neighbors in that regard, that when I had a plan to make something here, that it would be something good. So I also think that if the third neighborhood had been in place when had already been built, when we wanted to build a studio here, it probably wouldn't have happened. Not that I think there's nobody particularly fussy in the third neighborhood, but I just know how people get attached to their views. And I think for us to propose putting a building here on this place that would hide some of the views of the East Hill probably would not have gone over at all, I imagine. But as it is, people at Ecovillage seem to really appreciate Gourdlandia, and that's one of the benefits. That's like one of the main benefits of having my business here. And you know, the neighbors are some of my very best customers, and it goes both ways. Like, my neighbors appreciate my artwork, and I appreciate being able to share it with the neighbors. And I turn on the little cupola at the top of the building on winter nights, and people really appreciate that. And in the summertime, people are always coming and walking through the trellis, or asking us questions about hand pollinating, which we do in the evening. So all in all, I would say Ecovillage residents are much better informed about gourds than the average bear. And that's so let's see, I have some notes. I'm just going to take a look and see. I guess I just wanted to say that the benefits that I feel of living in community here as an individual are mostly the same benefits that I see as a business owner. Like Jim, I'm a sole proprietor, and the business here, Gourdlandia, feels a lot like an extension of myself. And so when I was sitting and thinking about exactly what is it like to have a business at Ecovillage, I was thinking, well, I have all the same benefits that I have as an individual to some extent. I mean, I can tap into the hive mind. That's one of the best things. When I have some need for the geek team, they're right on top of things. And I would say that just the way one feels part of something bigger, you know, it's what the community brings to me as an individual. It also brings to Gourdlandia as a business. I would say that sums up most of what I wanted to say. So maybe we should ask for questions. What do you think, Caitlin?
Awesome. I have a couple of questions for both of you that I wanted to start with. I'm curious, how people find your business, how much advertising or marketing you do and in what forms. And maybe an extension of that question is approximately what percentage of your clientele would you say is eco-villagers or finding you because they're affiliated with Ecovillage, compared with the broader Ithaca community, or probably in Gourdlandia's case, you're also getting a fair amount of tourists. So I guess the question is like marketing and how people are finding your business.
So people find Gourdlandia pretty easily online. Somehow I feel like I've won the advertising jackpot. I hardly have to promote Gourdlandia at all anymore because people just find it. It's partly because I'm listed on Atlas Obscura, and if anybody's familiar with that, it's an organization that's dedicated to promoting the world's hidden wonders, is what they say. So I guess Gourdlandia qualifies as a hidden wonder, and that in part I think is what has made it this business. It's successful enough that I don't have to do much advertising. I am on the Greater Ithaca Art Trail as well, so people find me that way. And I would say eco-villagers are some of my best customers, but they're not by any means like the majority of, like, I get a lot of customers from far and wide.
Yeah, the web is the main place where people find out about my classes, unless they happen to be residents. Right now, it's about 50-50 in terms of residents and non-residents. And the non-residents are all people who are willing to drive here 1 or 2 days a week. So within 15 miles or so, several people from West Hill neighborhood join. And also in terms of people who are a little bit west or north of Ithaca and want to do martial arts, may find me before they find something down the hill. I've got a sign I put out, but I try not to put it out too often because I know some residents don't want too many folks wandering in who don't have something already in mind that they're doing. So I'm trying to balance that a bit. I've dreamt about radio ads and things like that, but that takes a little bit more effort than I'm had to put in so far.
Thanks. I wanted to.
Oh, one other thing
Yeah, go for
that
it.
I imagine might work for Graham as well are some special events. When you do an event and it goes out in some calendar in Ithaca, that's one way I think about marketing and advertising.
I wanted to just give a little bit of context. So if it's not clear, Graham's business now has its own building. So if you were to come to Ecovillage, it would be a standalone retail building that you see at the, near the third neighborhood, and she has her own physical space. And that's compared with Jim and a lot of other folks who might have a business or a livelihood here who are using either their own homes as workspace or common space. So each of the 3 neighborhoods has its own common house, and we have a lot of commonly held land as well. And 2 of those common houses have office spaces. I think we get a lot of questions about the office space and how to access that, how to rent those spaces. So we do have more traditional spaces like that people are using, whether it's for their own business or if they're working remotely for someone else. For example, we have a couple of people who work for Cornell or other large organizations that sometimes go into a physical work location and sometimes will work either from home or from one of those common office spaces. They're not co-working spaces, they are private office spaces. We do have other kinds of livelihoods that use those spaces, whether it's counseling and therapy, or we do have quite a few people who make their livelihoods with like services and therapies and modalities related to health. But in Jim's case, he's one of the few people that is sort of renting other kinds of space, the multi-purpose room, the lawn spaces, like asking, and that's a process too, right? To have to make sure the community is on board with those kinds of use of space. And Jim very diplomatically talked about some of the conflicts that could come up in those situations. Jim, how frequently are your classes? I missed that point.
Tuesdays and Thursdays are when I have classes now. And so I do one common house on Tuesday and then another common house on Thursday. So I'm kind of dividing my usage of the shared space among the two common houses. And the space in the Frog Common House has a soft carpeted floor, which is great for kids to roll around on. And in the other one is a bigger space, which works better for adults. And we have some foam mats that we put down on the floor there for classes. And those are stored in the space. So when one of my neighbors was teaching ballet, she would put the foam mats down for her ballet class and things like that. Kids will use them for tumbling and that kind of thing.
I have one more question and then I will open it up to the group. Could either of you or both of you speak a little bit more to how being located at Ecovillage affects your business? I know you've both touched on it, but can you imagine how your business would look different if you happen to live in a different kind of community?
Well, I could say that it might have been hard before we had GPS, but people find me pretty easily now. And I think one advantage that I would have if I was just had a business out in the middle of nowhere is not the middle of nowhere. That probably wouldn't be much of an advantage, but I'm growing gourds in the same spot because it's still the spot that I have. I think if I had a bigger, if I had a little farm somewhere, I would probably be rotating my crop more easily. So right now I've just got this one little area, and I wouldn't say it's only about process, but it would be a bit of a process to ask to expand. Would also be, making more infrastructure. So, and that I would have anywhere. So, farming a bigger area would have pros and cons, but that's one thing that I've noticed here is we've just got the one spot to grow gourds in. I think that's all that I have to say about that.
I appreciate that I can run a small business, doing my art, sharing it with people, and not have to pay $1,500 a month in rent, which is what I would have to do to have a space in Ithaca. Then it becomes a major stress to pay the rent, and that changes the whole dynamic. So I can do it with less mental overhead, knowing that as a resident, I have access to the space, and as a business using the space, I pay rent to use it, but it's a tenth the cost or less than if I had a space to rent outside of Ecovillage. And I think if I had a big barn that was built for martial arts someplace, I would have a mortgage payment that would be similar to renting any place else. So kind of ease of entry into teaching classes is something that has been enabled by being at Ecovillage.
Great. And just to point out, here at Ecovillage, there are a couple of other kinds of operations happening. So there are 4 farms here on our property, and those are different models. Some of them are, private for-profit businesses. One of them's a nonprofit to do with training and an incubator farm. And then we have one farm that is more of it's a permaculture farm that's trying to model alternative practices and crops. But we also have someone who is a yoga instructor and runs a yoga studio from her home. We have someone who is running a forest school, like camps for youth, for children on our property. So there are different kinds of spaces and different kinds of businesses that are happening here. But we have about a half an hour left, and I'd like to open it up to those of you who might have other kinds of questions. And feel free to just, since we're a small group, feel free to just jump in with your questions, and the 3 of us will do our best to answer.
Hi, I guess I got a couple of questions. The community where I now live in the Princeton area has restrictions regarding any commercial activity at home. So I'm assuming, I'm still learning about Ecovillage, I'm assuming there are no restrictions. So for example, if you were to teach a private class, you could do it in your home, in your apartment at Ecovillage.
I don't know of any restrictions. Do you,
Okay.
Caitlin, in terms of teaching in your own home? I don't think there are any.
I don't know that there are official restrictions. Each neighborhood, so I mentioned we have 3 neighborhoods. Each neighborhood is its own legal entity. Each neighborhood is a cooperative. And so it will vary from neighborhood to neighborhood if they've chosen to place any restrictions. For example, in the Tree neighborhood, they're in the process of adopting definitions and limitations around short-term rentals. So we have currently 2 households that run hospitality from their homes. So we have Frog's Way, which is a bed and breakfast, and we have at least one other person currently running an Airbnb.
Yeah.
Some of those activities might be limited or restricted depending on which neighborhood you're in. I think, like a lot of places, there are considerations. So if you're proposing to do something that's going to generate a lot of car traffic or a lot of noise or some other kind of so-called nuisance that might disrupt people's lives in their homes, then it would probably come up for discussion, but I'm not aware of any formal restrictions. I think some people, and Jim, you might be able to speak to this better as someone who's gone through the process of working with the community to use common space, but I do know of a couple of instances where someone is a chef, for example, and they want to be able to run like a food related business out of the kitchen. Our kitchens are not commercial kitchens.
Right.
So there are some limitations with those kinds of businesses. And there are also conversations about if you're using common spaces like the community kitchen or the multi-purpose room, what are the rents or the arrangements, and schedule too would be another factor.
Right.
Those are the thoughts I had about that. Jim, did you have anything to add on that question?
No, I think any restrictions have evolved from specific issues or concerns that have come up over time, like, you know, people teach piano or whatever in their houses, and that kind of stuff just happens. And I don't think anybody thought to question whether or not running a business in a house was okay. It's
Right.
only when specific concerns come up that the community discusses how to manage those.
Uh-huh. And Jim, you mentioned that you teach Tuesdays and Thursdays. So do you pay rent for the common space for those days, for half days, by the hour? How does that work?
Yeah, it's by the hour, I believe, is how it's set up.
Huh.
And in Ecovillage ways, if it's me and my family and no one is making money off of it, you can just use the space. Like if you and your neighbors wanted to go do yoga
Right.
in the same space, you
Mhm.
don't have to pay rent because it's your space.
Uh-huh.
But when it turns into teaching, paying students, then it's a business, then you pay rent, and it's all spelled out in the neighborhood
course.
agreements that each cooperative corporation has policies already set in place on that.
Right. Thank you.
You know, I think some other things that come up for people, especially this day and age, and post-COVID, internet connection and those things are important. We have our own Wi-Fi infrastructure at Ecovillage, and households pay a monthly fee to access that service. And I'm not sure, and none of us here today are involved with businesses that are in those office spaces, but I don't know if there are additional fees for infrastructure like that. I would assume it's sort of included in whatever rental fees or lease fees people have with the offices. But we do pay. I know, Anna, you had some questions just about like what it costs to live and work in this community. And as residents, we do pay a monthly maintenance bill, and that's going to vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. It's going to vary depending on your household size, your usage of utilities, and things like that. But our monthly bills do include things like internet. They include maintenance and upkeep of some of those common areas. And it also does include taxes, which is a unique situation. Most people are not used to, right? Paying taxes on a monthly basis. So those fees can range from $600 to $900, depending on which neighborhood you're in, you know, the size of your house. So like the condos in the tree common house are going to be on the lower end because they're smaller spaces, they're highly efficient. And so those tend to be in that more $600 a month range. And it can vary from there. There's a lot of nuance to the cost of living here. Some things are based on you know, just shared equally among the households. Some things depend on the square footage of your home. Some depend on how many shares your home is. Some depends on your usage. So that is a little bit of a moving target. But yeah, that's part of the answer to that question. Something else that I want to say is, and Jim sort of alluded to this, you know, the cost to rent space here is relatively low compared to the market. So the farmers, for example, those 4 farms that I mentioned, their rent to the Ecovillage entity is essentially just covering property taxes. And I don't know the rates for the offices. I don't know if anyone else here knows kind of what the office spaces are renting for, but Graham, I don't know what kind of arrangement you have with EVI Inc. or the VA when it comes to, like, do you have a land lease, or how does that
I
work
have a
with
land lease,
Okay.
and And I pay my water bill and taxes once a year. Yvonne sends me a bill. It's usually on the neighborhood of $2,000 for the year. And that covers the land lease and the water, the taxes.
Mhm.
And I think they decided that because I would be, I have a building here, I'll be using the road and that's why they give me, that's why I have a lease to pay.
Mhm.
And you built your building in what year was that?
It
26?
was going up the same time the third neighborhood was going up. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's one of the newer, it's the most recent building really on
Yeah,
our
we
property.
broke ground about 10 years and a few months ago.
Were there any other questions? I know, Jonathan, you're on the bus. If you wanted to ask a question through chat or anything like that, that's welcome.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Is the Wi-Fi reliable?
Yes,
Good.
it's really good Wi-Fi.
Yeah, although I've noticed it can depend on the routers. We have routers all over the village, and we have a really excellent geek team. And I think it's important to understand in a community like this, most things are running through volunteer service. So when it comes to IT support or maintenance or landscape or cook team or dish crew or all the things that, and governance, the things that keep our community running are done primarily through volunteerism. So we're pretty fortunate to have people here with skill sets to
Mhm.
keep things operating smoothly and updating routers and updating infrastructure and systems. And Jonathan is actually recently moved to Ecovillage and is one of those people that's starting to help out with that. So that's something too, besides just,
Wow.
the work that we do as professionally, having a variety of skill sets is really helpful to just keep the community going and running smoothly. Ethan or Jonathan, did either of you have questions on this topic or anything else? Jonathan just commented that he gets 1 gigabit wired internet speed.
Yeah, that's about 20 times faster than the speed I get at home. So that's good enough.
But it's important too, because there are a lot of people who, many of our meetings, for example, like our committee and board meetings are still happening online. A lot of
Yeah.
people still use Zoom in their daily lives. So it is a necessary
Well,
infrastructure.
I work remotely. My
Mhm.
full-time job is remote.
Mhm.
So I would need to be wired most of the day. I've
Mhm.
also been teaching a lot through Zoom.
Got
I
it.
doubt that's going to change, but in situations where face-to-face is preferred, it's nice to know that one has a chance to teach face-to-face too.
Mhm.
So that's good.
Yeah, there's a mix of that happening here. There are a couple of people who've been music teachers. Obviously, most of that work needs to happen in person. We've had people who are tutors of different kinds,
Yeah.
and that is more flexible, right? That could happen both in person or remotely.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hmm.
We have a few minutes left for those of you who might have other questions. Jim, remind me, when did you start the dojo? How long have you been doing this?
2014 is when it officially started in September.
So what you must have been using, what spaces were you using? Because the tree common house wouldn't have been complete yet, right?
Yeah, I was using the mat room in the Frog neighborhood common house, and working outside in the summers. So that's a smaller space. So I did multiple classes with fewer number of students. And in tree, I can have more like 10 or 12 kids at a time because it's a little bit bigger space.
Graham, were you able to build, I mean, you mentioned if you had an ideal situation, you'd have more space to grow gourds, but were you able to get as much space as you wanted for the studio and the workshop? Has
Yes.
space been a
Yeah.
limiting factor?
Space, no, I mean, the space wasn't a limiting factor, it was more our budget, of course, but yeah, and we situated the building right here because at the time, so 12 years ago when we were discussing me building a building here, there was a thought that we might have like a little row of shops. I don't think nobody talks about that anymore. I think Steve Gorder loved that idea of having a sort of I don't know, center of commerce isn't the right thing, but just a little row of shops that so that's one of the reasons we've ended up being right here instead of like out by the road. That was another place we looked at, land out closer to West Haven Farm, but ended up here.
Jonathan wanted to mention, there's also a recent effort or movement to create more of a co-working vibe or community. So there are a couple of residents who have simply, set up times for people to work together in the common houses. Of course, each sort of coming and going and working independently, but having that opportunity to share space and be around each other. And in most cases, that's happening just in one of the dining rooms. So it doesn't require paying rent. It doesn't require, setting up a specific space. It's more of just an advantage of, again, living in community and providing yet another kind of work environment for people. So. Oh, and Jonathan also added that there are many great gourd lamps in that house. I have also lived in that house. I would say that house probably has one of the biggest collections of gourd
and a
lamps.
whole village of great customers. Dave McCobb is one of the best.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and you offer workshops too, right? So it's not only the retail space that you have, but you mentioned the class that you're having.
Yeah, that's why I have such a big studio and great big table that we made for classes. Yeah, these days, most weekends, I'm doing classes 1 or 2 afternoons. So.
Well, if there are no other questions, then I was just gonna.
Anna has another question.
Oh, sorry.
I have a quick one. I was thinking now about the idea to have co-working spaces. Are residents limited to using the common areas in their own community only, or can there be any crossovers and people in Frog can use common space in Song or Tree?
It's a good question. Does anyone else want to take it, or should I?
You can cross over. I've gone to the co-working space in Frog, and I've done the same thing in Tree and Song. So there's some social pressure to do most of your stuff in most of your common houses when it's just you. But when it's
Right.
community stuff, you just go wherever, and it's very, very open that way.
That's good to know, that there is some flexibility, because sometimes the impression is that even though, it's one eco-village, there's this division and people belong in one community. So I was wondering, because Jonathan's idea to have a co-working space is fun, but you might not get enough people in one community only to want to do that. So good. Good to know.
Yeah, generally, my experience has been that it's very inter-neighborhood oriented, and each neighborhood has its own common house, but those common house spaces are open and available to anyone who lives in the village. And each neighborhood hosts a community meal about once a week, and many of those are also open to the village. Sometimes they're neighborhood specific, but generally open to the neighborhood. So yes, I think there is generally an attempt to feel like one whole community, although when you have 240 people, that's a lot of people. So we don't have spaces that could fit the whole community at once, or that sort of thing anymore, now that we have the 3 neighborhoods. But I did want to mention just a couple things in closing. So some other support that we have for working and businesses include our livelihoods page. So the Ecovillage at ithaca.org website has many sections to it, and one of those is a livelihoods page where residents can list their business or accommodations and things like that. And what was the other thing I was going to mention? It's already left my brain. Oh, well, and then there are occasional events that are just to showcase what people are doing around the village, and those don't necessarily have to be about people's vocation or work. It could be anything. So we have the Ribbit Gallery, which is gallery space in the Frog Common House, where people can show their visual arts. We have once a year the Spark Fest, which is a way for us to internally just share our talents with each other, whether it's visual arts or performing arts. And then we've also started having, at least once a year around the holidays, a craft fair, which is open to the public, where people can, some people sell honey and maple syrup, or crafts or artwork that they're making. So there are a lot of different opportunities for people to display what their talents and skills are, whether for fun or for a profession.
Right.
Any last thoughts from anyone? I'll just mention a couple of things then as we wrap up. So this coming weekend is actually National Co-Housing Open House Weekend. And so we do have a public tour on Saturday at 3 p.m. I mentioned there's a yoga studio here at Ecovillage, Saraswati Studio in 130 Frog neighborhood. There's a yoga class at 9:30, and then Gourdlandia will be open on Saturday from 1 to 4 with workshops and retail. And then the next online question and answer session will be June 7th. So they're always the first Wednesday of the month at noon. I just noticed a typo there, but that will be covering sociocracy and governance. And if you want to stay in touch with us, there are many ways of doing that. So we have a newsletter that you could subscribe to. We have socials. and both Jim and Graham also have websites and socials for their businesses too. And we at Thrive are offering different kinds of programming, both in person and online throughout the year. So thanks for those of you who are able to come today. And I really wanted to thank Jim and Graham for sharing your time with us and sharing a little bit about what you're doing. And
Happy to be here. Thanks very much for hosting it.
great.
Yeah,
Great. Thank
you all.
you. Oh, Jonathan, did you have, oh, you're just clapping. Okay, great. I saw the hand. I thought it was a raised hand. Well, awesome. Thanks, everyone.